Hi, and welcome to part 3 of our Educate and Elevate series. Today's session will be focused on data triangulation and how to use data to drive outcomes for students with disabilities. Kathy Griffin, the Institute's Director of Special Education, will lead us through understanding student data so that we can move the needle. Thank you for being here, and we hope you enjoy part 3 of Educate and Elevate, using data triangulation to drive outcomes.
Thank you, Selena. I'm excited to be here today to review and discuss data triangulation and its impact on improving student outcomes. Did you know, according to the U.S. Department of Labor, jobs today require post-secondary education or considerable on-the-job training, while jobs requiring routine manual tasks will continue to decrease. Wages for careers that require higher levels of education and training will outpace non-degree jobs, with the average college graduate earning 77% more than the typical high school graduate. Students who fail school are 3 times more likely to be unemployed and twice as likely to be working poor. Half of single moms did not complete high school. Did you know children born to poverty are 5 times more likely to live in poverty as an adult? Did you know high school dropouts are 50% more likely to be arrested and 63 times more likely to be incarcerated? Did you know each year of schooling prior to age 35 increases lifespan by 2 years? Female dropouts will live an average of 10.5 fewer years than females who graduate from high school. Male dropouts will live an average of 13 fewer years than males who graduate from high school. Ultimately, what are you trying to improve? Improved outcomes for students means closing achievement gaps instead of growing those gaps. How do we do this? By reviewing student data, isolating skills, and developing goals for the IEP that will help that student achieve those skills. Ultimately, the goal is graduation from high school with the greatest skill set possible. So for today's agenda, today we will define data triangulation, discuss resources for data triangulation, and define the purpose of data triangulation in the context of your work. Data triangulation. What is it and why is it important? In considering the use of multiple measures, it's important to consider the principle of triangulation. Data triangulation is using multiple data sources, data collection procedures, and analytic procedures. Why is this so important? It can ensure a more accurate view that will help teams in making more effective decisions. Using triangulation assures that the most informed and appropriate decisions are being made on behalf of each student. So what's all the hype about? What is the benefit of reviewing multiple sources of data? It helps us to focus on and be accountable for what matters most: individual student outcomes. By focusing on student data, it provides a common language, makes assumptions explicit, and supports continuous improvement while promoting communication. Triangulating student data helps guide you and the IEP team on what matters most and prioritizing what that student needs to know and learn this year by reviewing and comparing the student's current present levels to his or her non-disabled peers and developing achievable goals that the student can master, and then making sure that the teachers have the resources they need to instruct that student. Begin by thinking not only of curriculum and interventions, but also assistive technology, accommodations, and a continuous process of collecting and analyzing student data for improved outcomes. School personnel have a wealth of data available about their students. A teacher reviews a score from an interim assessment. She noticed something puzzling and decides to triangulate it with data from the attendance system and from a diagnostic test. This will help confirm an inference about the student. A string of absences when we covered this likely caused the problem, as the diagnostic data doesn't identify any issues. The teacher might then decide that reteaching would be a viable strategy to close this achievement gap. Assessment scores and the associated reports and resources provided can be extremely useful tools for informing instruction and making administrative decisions, but they should not be used in exclusion to each other or to other data sources. Using triangulation assures that the most informed and appropriate decisions are being made on behalf of each student. Triangulation of data doesn't mean multiple sources of data confirming the same thing. It's about the relationships between the data. Data triangulation supports program and strategic planning. It helps to communicate goals and progress and serves as a basis for ongoing learning to make your work stronger and more effective. We're going to pause here for a moment. I want you to make a list of data your school collects for your students. And then what is done with that data? Is it shared? Is it displayed? Is student achievement celebrated and shared with parents? Is it shared with the student themselves? Now it's time for a quick tip. Data walls are simple and effective tools for displaying student data. Data walls can be done for the whole school and in individual classrooms. Building a data wall is a practical and powerful way to focus the work of every teacher on the growth and achievement of every student. Data to use for making informed decisions can come from many different places. Here is a sample list of measures that can be used to make informed decisions. No single system uses all of the measures available at all times. In addition to being overwhelming to implement, it wouldn't effectively answer different educational questions, such as, are all second graders on track to be grade level readers by the end of third grade? And which second graders understand phonemes? By using the list above to create customized sets of measures, however, teachers and administrators can get the answers they seek. While there are many good reasons to use multiple measures, there's also a fundamental reason to do so. All measures have some degree of error or bias. It might be acceptable to measure something like height or weight using one instrument, say a yardstick or bathroom scale, because these measurements rarely lead to any real consequences. Generally, if the measurement isn't exact, it will be close enough. It provides a reasonable estimate of the individual's height or weight. When making inferences about a construct as complex as the acquisition of knowledge, however, there's no one instrument that will give a close enough picture. In considering the use of multiple measures, it's important to consider the principle of triangulation. Triangulation is simply the process of using at least 3 points of data when making educational decisions. Any single interim assessment score is subject to environmental or motivational influences which can affect its accuracy. Whether conducting assessment for learning or assessment of learning, a teacher must have sufficient proof of a student's learning. By using data triangulation, teachers can obtain data of student learning from 3 different sources, thereby ensuring sufficient data is collected in order to evaluate the student's learning. By collecting data from multiple sources, teachers are able to verify the data they collect against each other, thus allowing them to gain an accurate portrayal of student progress. Now let's pause and practice. I need you to enter into the chat an answer to this question. What are powerful things that you can do as a special education leader to increase student achievement for students with disabilities? Time for a quick tip. Do you know your school's data? You need to be able to look at your student data and be able to compare it to schools' data and state data overall. Interpreting data allows teachers to identify strengths and weaknesses of an entire class as well as individual students. As they examine the data, teachers can develop hypotheses about factors that affect students' learning and ways to improve instruction to help all students achieve. Now let's hear from the Institute's Chief of School Improvement and Accountability on data collection in the schools.
Good afternoon. I'm Rich Melzer and wanted to share some triangulation of data for all of you special education folks. By the way, I need to tell you that I really admire the job that you do and know that you not only have to work with kids, but you have to work with teachers and parents as well. So I wanted to share these 4 critical questions that the 4 always asks, and these are great to remember when you're triangulating data. What do the students need to know and be able to do? How will we know when they got it? How will we respond if they don't get it? And how will we respond if they already have it? And typically, a special educator needs to know the first 2 for sure. And the second one talks about what we're talking about today. How do you know when the students get it? What data do you have? And then, of course, you have to respond to this one all the time. How will we respond to the kids when they don't get it? So, to me, what you need is a solid assessment portfolio, and almost all the schools have this. You should have some national level assessment, you should have some local level assessment, and you should have some school level assessment. The national level assessment would be something like MAP, NWEA, or iReady, or STAR. The commonalities of the national level assessments are these. They are nationally normed, that is, you know how the kids perform compared to the rest of the people in the nation, and they're adaptive. In other words, the test moves to the ability of the student. If a student is not doing well, it'll back them down. If they're doing exceptionally well, it'll move them up. And for a special educator, it really is helpful when the adaptive test moves it down because it gives you a starting point. All the assessments have all kinds of reports, and what I really wanted to share with you today are a couple reports that's available on MAP. If you're using iReady or STAR, I'm sure they have some of the same reports, but I want to point this out because most of our schools are using MAP. So in MAP, the one thing that you can do, if you look at this is called a classroom set. And in the classroom, it tells you how all the kids are doing. It gives you their RIT score, which is here. It'll give you their percentile rank. And then it'll also give you a reading lexile. And so that is great and valuable information as you're looking through. This is the reading one, but you would get the same thing for mathematics. And what that helps is it begins to hone you in on what kids need. Obviously, if a kid is scoring, you see a child here on this particular sample is in the 5th percentile. Obviously, you have a problem, and it's easy to figure out that this kid needs extra help. You can see that you have a child in the 38th percentile. Well, that child is getting to the point where they probably could pass many of the questions that are asked on the state assessments. So the next report I want to point out to you is this one, and this one is helpful because it groups students. And because you guys have so many varied students, this is especially helpful in that the RIT score would be the same for a kid that's in 3rd grade or 4th grade. So if you see this child here and you go and look at the same report and you see that they're at this RIT level here, that might be a great group for you. So if you're looking for a group of 2 to 4 students, that's a way that you can group. The next assessment I want you to look at is one that I think is really important for you all. And again, I think this is this is in both iReady and STAR as well. But with MAP, you can see that they give you the learning continuum. And the learning continuum tells you the things that the kids are ready for. So a child that's in the 161 to 170 category, there are the things, the standards that the kids need to know. And be able to do. Here are the ones for the kids that are more on grade level, and here are the ones that, for the kids that would be more advanced. So The nice thing for a special educator is it would tell you where the kids are ready to move and where they need to be addressed. This one is really great. And of course, this one I think is only available with MAP. And that is up here are the scores that they have, the RIT scores for reading. And when you click on that, it shows you where the child is and how much they have to grow to get on grade level. The other thing it does is it allows you to look at the learning continuum and to see where the kids need to go next or where they've already been. So it's a very, very helpful tool. Again, this particular report is interactive, and if you click on the specific child, it'll tell you where that child is and needs to be able to perform. If you need any help with that, I'm sure you have people within the school who can get you to that report. And if not, then I'd certainly be glad to share with you how you get to that report. The next level that we talked about when we're talking about assessment portfolio is the local level. So examples of local level information would be SC Ready, SC Pass, the 2 states assessments. In high school, it'd be in the course tests. Or some of you are using benchmark assessments like T21, USA Test Prep, Edmentum. The commonalities is they are summative. They are at the end of a learning segment. Typically, they're criterion referenced, which means that there is a criteria for each of the answers, and the criteria are the state standards. So that's how you make judgments. Are the kids passing those, or are they able to master those concepts? Local and classroom level assessments, I just listed a bunch, but all of you, I'm sure, can think of a ton more than I've put down here. Number one is common formative assessments. And common formative assessments would be when a grade level works together and develops an assessment, and it's in common between those teachers. The other thing is formative means for learning. So the assessment here isn't necessarily to get at a score. The assessment is to find out how the kids are doing so you can move them along in their instructional level. Teacher observation is hugely important. You know by observation how the kids are doing. You can see whether they're struggling with some things that you couldn't do by putting them in front of a computer screen. Student-teacher conferencing. I hope all of you do that. You get an opportunity to talk back and forth with the student, find out what they know and they're able to do, and then also provide some feedback to help them do better the next time. The next thing is some people use running records. This lets you know some of the particular things that kids need to work on, and reading Lexiles. The commonalities between all of these classrooms is they should be formative in that nature. In other words, they should tell you how to direct the student in instruction and how they can do better the next time. These are usually teacher-made and teacher-owned assessments. Grading is not necessary, as I mentioned earlier. The real reason for doing this isn't that you get a grade. The real reason for doing this would be that you know where the child is and where you need to take them instructionally. Here's an example of formative assessments. And again, I don't know how many schools are doing this. There's a lot of, I did this by hand, but a lot of schools are using products that develop these. But if you look across this way, vertically, you can see that Connie Conrad is struggling all the way across the board. That's probably a student that you'd want to take an interest in. Happy Hippo is another one that seems to be struggling across the board, as well as Stanley Steamer. So again, the vertical piece kind of tells you a little bit about each of the students and what they need to know and be able to do. Each block represents the standard that was taught. Again, this would be on grade level, and if you are lucky enough to work with grade levels that have developed this, then you can look at this standard. If you look, there are many more questions on this item, on ATO3, than there are on this item. And the reason for that would be this. This would be the area that either the benchmarks or the blueprint, the test blueprint, tells you there'll be more questions. And obviously this standard receives the least amount of attention because it is the least impacted on the state assessment. So most impacted, middle impacted, and least impacted. You'll notice that we have a lighter column here that's filled with blue and white, and this is a column that tells you whether the student can do advanced level work. You know that this is a standard a level above, as well as this one and these two on the ends. Again, the purpose would be to answer the forced question, what do you do with a student who already has it? So it would be beautiful if you're working with classroom teachers who do something similar to this, but also do a pre-assessment and a post-assessment. The pre-assessment, if this were a pre-assessment, you'd feel pretty good about yourself. This area here would allow you to do some extra work in it because obviously more kids miss more answers in this area. If this were a post-assessment, you'd feel pretty crummy about this area here. The other thing you notice, it will allow you to look at item analysis. So this particular question here, every kid missed. So either we didn't teach it or that's a bad question. And so it's often a good thing to look at the assessment. Here's another question which a lot of kids missed. Is that a bad question? Is it stated in a funny way that kids didn't understand? Or is it simply just a matter of we didn't teach it? So again, I'm really pushing this because if you can, I know you're an influencer more than you are a policymaker, but if the teachers you're working with are using classroom assessments like this and they're pre and post assessing, then it really, really helps you as you're developing your special education program or your IEP. So I wanted to share this with you. This is really the things that you should look for when you're trying to find priority standards. And I was thinking about doing this presentation and realized that this is really probably a great thing to think about when you're building IEP goals. So how do you select IEP goals? Well, one thing you can do is look at the readiness. What does a student need to master in order to move to the next grade level? And if you have a kid that's well behind, you want to make sure that you're plugging up some of those gaps. Endurance. Does a standard matter over time? Is this one of those standards that's only learned once? For example, telling time is one that we used to have throughout the curriculum. But if you look at the curriculum now, I think it's in first or second grade where time is taught. So that's not an endurance strategy. That's not one that over time you're going to be doing. Does it have leverage? Does it help you be successful on another standard? This would be hugely important as you're developing an IEP. Does what you are putting on the IEP or what you're making a priority standard, does it align with the accountability assessment or expectations? If you remember the previous slide, I showed you the three standards and I showed you the level at which the assessment writers plan to hit the hardest. The area all the way to the right was the standard that should receive the most attention. So does your IEP goal match what would be expected on the assessment? And then the last thing is teacher judgment, and special educators, probably no one is a better expert at this than you are, and looking at the students and realizing what they need to know and be able to do. Designing interventions. First of all, we're talking about triangulating data. So gather all the personal data and teacher feedback. It's imperative that you have feedback from the classroom teacher so that you guys can be walking hand in hand. Establish priority standards, or in this case, solid IEP goals. Establish a method for monitoring progress. This is the hardest one and the one that needs the most attention. How are you going to know whether the kids are improving? Especially if you're working a grade level behind. How are you going to monitor progress and make sure that that student is moving ahead? And then the other thing is, it also goes with number one, is make sure you have regular and full communication with the classroom teacher. Their data and input is imperative. Finally, I want to share what I call can't miss strategies. And you may think that I missed on these, but I think they're can't miss. The first one is students must get exposure to grade level content. No matter how much we love and care for these kids, the truth of the matter is they have to take the state assessment. So if all the kids ever get to do is remedial work, think how frustrating that's going to be when they take the assessment, the state assessment. So always make sure that they are getting grade level exposure. Pulling a kid out during math or ELA can be really detrimental to the kid if they're not getting that exposure to the grade level information. The second thing I already mentioned in the previous slide, make sure you're doing some pre and post assessments. The pre-assessment will tell you what they need to know and be able to do. The post-assessment will tell you, did they get it? Do they have the information that you're getting? And then the last strategy I wanted to share with you, I've had a few teachers over the years use this strategy, and I think it really can be truly effective. That is that you're going to teach ahead of the classroom teacher. So the graphic you see here, while the classroom work is on geometry, your special education work might be on algebraic thinking that is below grade level. So you're going to try to catch them up. So here's the advantage. The kid gets all of the vocabulary and begins to understand. And so when they actually move up and begin taking algebraic thinking at grade level, the concepts aren't perfectly new. They will have heard the language and they will have heard the things, so it seems familiar to them. So the same time that they're working on algebraic thinking, you're going to preview numbers and operations. And again, using your triangulated data, you're going to know which of those standards you need to move to so that you can build and scaffold for that kid to do better. So they're doing algebraic thinking on grade level, you're working on numbers and operations. Then finally, they're working on numbers and operations, and you'd move to the next concept. Let's just say it's base 10. So again, the idea of previewing is that the kid becomes familiar with the language, hears the terms, begins to understand a little bit about what they're doing before they're thrust into grade level work, which is probably going to be a stretch for most of the kids. That completes all of what I wanted to share with you today. I hope this is helpful. If there's any information that I could do, my name is Rich Melzer. I'm the Chief of Accountability for Erskine Charters. Please give me a call or email me, and I'd be glad to share with you any way I can. Thank you for letting me share.
Now we're going to talk about data triangulation for IEP development. Let's take a closer look at how to use behavior data in your IEPs. As with academic data, you will need to include multiple data sources to fully define the behavior and write goals that will lead to positive student outcomes. This slide demonstrates an example of some different types of data sources that you can pull from. As discussed in last month's Educate and Elevate session, there are two forms of behavior data, direct and indirect. Indirect methods include reviewing records and past psychological reports. Additionally, pulling all past discipline reports and referrals is very valuable information, as it assists in determining patterns of behavior. Checklists, questionnaires, and interviews are other forms of indirect data collection. Direct methods of data collection are pulled from observations of the student's behavior. It is important to collect data from a variety of sources, as you would never want to use a single piece of data. Once you have collected data from multiple sources, you will then begin to form your behavior goal for the student. IDEA requires that each IEP must include a statement of the child's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. You will synthesize your behavior data and findings into the present levels. You will include the child's strengths and weaknesses, what helps the child learn, which are the accommodations, if needed, and what limits or interferes with the child's learning. Any objective data from the current evaluations of the child and how the child's disability affects his or her ability to be involved and progress in the general education curriculum. for behavior also include information about how the behavior affects the child's ability to progress and access the general education curriculum. If the student is spending time in the hallway or in the principal's office due to behavior, this prevents the child's ability to access instruction. Remember, behavior is a result of not only the student's skills, but also the student's environment. So descriptive statements such as given a large group instructional environment or in activities that encourage movement provide an understanding of the child's behavior within the context. Let's take a look at an example. This is John. In his IEP, this is what is written for his strengths. John is a 9-year-old 4th grade student with average ability whose achievement testing shows relative strength in reading and weakness in math. John is reading at grade level and has good comprehension. He likes to read and he also enjoys science activities. His most recent CBM testing showed that he read 111 words per minute, which is at the 65th percentile on local norms. Math CBM testing showed that he scored 9 digits correct in a 2-minute timing, which is at the 17th percentile on district 4th grade norms. Mom reports that he brings home assignments requiring reading, but he forgets his math homework. Let's pause and take a look at this example. There are 2 different types of direct observation used in this example: ABC and interval observation, as well as interview data. Additionally, 3 accommodations were included in the present levels that he needs to be successful. Now let's take a look at an example goal for this student based on the data that has been collected. By the end of this IEP, John will demonstrate the ability to attend to a task for an average of 75% of intervals in a 20-minute class period. Another goal could be, by the end of this IEP, when given an assigned task, John will independently complete the assignment or task and ask for assistance if needed, with 75% accuracy in 5 out of 5 consecutive trials as measured by a behavior chart. When it comes to writing behavior goals for an IEP, you may come across some challenges. So let's address some of the different solutions to some common issues. Many schools collect lots of data, but sometimes they do not do anything with it. If you are finding this a problem in your school, then you need to establish a process for regular input of data by assigning roles and responsibilities to people, and require the use of this data to inform decisions. Make sure you use your data. It can be extremely frustrating to a teacher if they are collecting multiple points of data, but they never see it in action. The next problem faced by some schools is they are not using appropriate data to make decisions. If this is the case, then progress monitoring data is your solution. Regularly collect progress data to truly understand the function of the behavior and then address it based on the accurate and updated data you have collected. Students that have behavior goals or functional behavior assessments and behavior intervention plans will need more frequent meetings to review the data, goals, and plan. Now, what if your goals are unmeasurable or subjective? If this is the case, then focus the goals on skills that can be taught or measured. I would encourage you to go back and view Session 2 of the Educate and Elevate, where we address defining behavior for some more helpful tips. In your live binder, you will find a handy guide from the Center of Intensive Intervention that addresses strategies for setting data-driven behavioral goals.
Now we'll hear from Selena Patton, Chief of Student Services at the Institute, about using student data to guide special education budgetary decisions and improving your special education program. Selena?
Thanks, Kathy. It is important to align your school's student data with your budgetary decisions. How you decide to spend your funds should always be directly aligned with your students' needs. But this can be a challenge when faced with making the decisions for how to best spend your school's monies. So in order to help our schools with this, the Institute team has developed a helpful guide that will assist our schools when making budgetary decisions that will be most beneficial for your students. This tool is called the Special Education Budgetary Decision-Making Guide. Let's take a look at some of the components that should be considered when looking to improve how you are allocating your funding to drive outcomes. When you are aligning your students' needs with your budget, you should consider the following. What areas would impact student outcomes? What does the data tell us? What do we need to know more about before making a decision? Do you have enough data to make that decision? And from that, what types of expenses should your school prioritize to improve outcomes for students with disabilities? Now let's take a closer look at the SPED Budgetary Decision-Making Guide. There are multiple different points of data that your school should use. Step 1 of this guide instructs you to gather student achievement data. What this means is that you and your school leadership team should consolidate your students' test scores data. This can be in form of MAP scores, state assessment data, CBMs, and any other data points your school has for students with disabilities. Then you will use the data dive questions listed on this form to have meaningful conversations centered around the implications of the data. Ask questions like, what does the data tell us? Are there demographics or subgroup populations that are underserved? And are there grade levels that seem to have the highest need and why? If your team determines that there is a need, what would you do with this information and what budgetary decisions do you need to make? Step 2 of the guide, review the type of instruction and curriculum used in the school. Once you have listed out this information, determine what the data is telling you. Ask your team questions like, do we have the right instructional tools to meet the individual needs of our students? And if not, what types of materials can you purchase to meet this need? Now let's move on to step 3. Use all the data collected thus far to determine the depth of capacity you have in your school building, and then determine what areas you can focus spending on that will help improve building capacity. Ask questions like, what professional development has been previously offered to your special education staff? And has it been effective in improving instruction provided to the students? If not, ask your team what additional and targeted professional development might the school need. And finally, the last piece of the decision-making guide is step 4, using data to evaluate the effectiveness of the procedures that are in place at your school and how funding can improve any identified area of need. Your school team should ask questions like, what are the number of minutes your teachers are expected to teach throughout a school day, as listed in their students' IEPs? Do they have enough time in the day to effectively plan lessons and serve their students? If not, you should focus on allocating any additional monies for new staff. Using all 4 points of this data will ensure your school is aligning its budget to meet the needs of its students. You can find this guide both on our website and in your Live Binder. This concludes today's session of Educate and Elevate. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed learning about how to use data to drive outcomes. We look forward to seeing you on April 23rd for Session 4, where we will focus on understanding the evaluation and reevaluation processes.